Colonel Richard Black, welcome to the mother of all talk shows. On the face of it, Colonel, Senator, this is a grave international crime which is alleged against the American government and the Norwegian government. Will any consequences likely follow?
Well, I doubt that there will be consequences, but there is no doubt that it is a grave criminal act. Here you had $22 billion that were plowed into building the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. It was a partnership that involved principally, the two big principals were Germany and Russia. And it was designed to facilitate and enhance the prosperity in both countries. The gas would come from Russia, it would flow into Germany. Now, the natural gas is the key ingredient that forms the foundational chemicals that are then used to produce other chemicals down the line, various successions. Germany's economy is very reliant on a huge, powerful chemical industry. It goes back hundreds of years. The Germans have been some of the greatest chemists in history, and without the inexpensive natural gas, you don't have the foundational element. So this was something that was going to benefit the Russian people and the German people, and it was completed. The entire project was completed over quite a number of years, $20 billion. And the United States had several interests. One is the U.S. was concerned that somehow Russia would have a lot more bargaining power if they supplied the oil, or rather the gas, to Europe. So that was a big issue. Another issue is the fact that the United States very recently, like within the last 15 years, has created a very major natural gas industry. Now, we always had natural gas, but we created an industry that liquefied the natural gas so that it could be shipped overseas. And that meant that Europe was a huge market. Now, the problem is that the American liquefied natural gas is multiple times as expensive as the piped in natural gas from Russia. So there's no way that we could compete economically in a capitalistic sense. So the only way that we could do it would be to cut off the supply of gas coming in from Russia. And that is what we did. Now, there was an immense series of explosions underseas that destroyed the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which actually is two pipelines in parallel, and also the Nord Stream 1 pipeline. And the explosives were laid by divers in the course of, we were putting on a military operation called Baltops. And under cover of that operation, we laid the explosives in place. And then under the insistence of the White House, we wanted to make sure that we could set them off at any time so that we could make sure that the explosions took place in a way that would not distract from other things happening, or perhaps would be overlooked because other things would be happening. And so Seymour Hersh, well, first of all, when the explosions took place, there was an intercept received a text message from Liz Truss, who at the time was the was the prime minister, and she sent a very short, cryptic message to Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, and she said, "It's done." Now, she said that just moments after the explosions took place. So we knew, obviously, she knew that the mission was complete. She was informing him. There was a lot of speculation. Did the United Kingdom actually carry out the mission? But and now Seymour Hersh has laid out with enormous precision how the action was carried. American divers are trained, and that those American divers carried out the operation, putting the explosives in place. Then later, several months afterwards, a Norwegian plane flew over, dropped into the water, this kind of a sonobuoy that was able to push a certain frequency signal that would sort of overcome all of the other possible signals. And the Norwegians actually set off the detonation, or at least they put in place the mechanism to do it. The U.S. ordered the detonation, and we destroyed the pipelines. There was a great debate within the insiders who were planning this operation. There was considerable opposition because it is an act of war to destroy a major facet of capital infrastructure of a foreign nation. So it was an act of war against Russia, but it was also an act of war against Germany. And now Norway benefited greatly because Norway is a tremendous producer of oil and natural gas. So all of a sudden they were able, by virtue of helping to blow up the pipelines, they were able to triple the price that they got for the natural gas that they sent to Europe. So they had a tremendous market for it at a tremendously high price. So the whole operation smacks of the types of things that the mafia used to do in New York City. When they took over, and they would go around to business people and they'd say, look, you can buy our insurance or you can not buy it. But if you don't burn it, your house is going to burn down. Your business is going to burn down. And they burned them down, and they assassinated the business owners. We're really not any more moral or lawful or decent than the mafia. Al Capone, he operated the same way that the foreign policy establishment operates today.
Now, you've established stupendously well the answer to the ancient question, cui bono, who benefited from the crime. The United States and Norway have financially reaped an enormous bonanza dividend as a result of this, and will presumably do so forevermore, as long as we are using gas. But if you are prosecuting this, Senator, what other arguments would you bring to bear? What other evidence is there to bring to bear to place the responsibility of it where most people think it really ought to be?
You know, you mentioned the long-standing maxim, cui bono, CUIBONO, and in essence, cui bono means who benefits from the crime. And the United States, through the very compliant media, put out this silly notion. They said, well, Russia destroyed their own pipeline that they've worked on for over a decade, and they plowed enormous financial resources into, and for which they gained enormous benefit. They destroyed it. Well, a school child can tell you that's not true. I mean, that's so foolish that just on the face of it, unless you are a dedicated follower of the government edicts, then there's no way that any reasonable, objective person will believe that. So, I'm a career prosecutor. I was the chief of the criminal law division and oversaw the prosecution of thousands of cases. And you don't talk about cui bono, but you just instinctively look who benefits. Okay, is it the husband of the dead wife who recently took out insurance policies on her life? This kind of thing. Who benefits? And you can name several countries. The United States benefits, the UK, Norway, Poland. And then the next question, so basically you have motive. And then you want to look at means and opportunity. Well, here's where you begin to narrow it down, because the United States dominates NATO. We make the decisions for NATO. The Supreme Allied Commander Europe has always been a 4-star American general. And we provide the bulk of the funding and so forth. So nothing is going to happen within any of these NATO countries without the explicit okay of the United States. The US is going to give the green light or it's not going to happen. So that takes out of the equation countries like Poland, even a country like Norway, because Norway is not going to instigate something. They are going to take their orders from the US, and not even with the UK. You can get to a country like Ukraine. Ukraine doesn't have the means to carry this out. And at the same time, if they do something that crosses the US, we can cut off their access to arms and supplies and they die. I mean, they're essentially a welfare state, totally financed and supported by the United States and the West. Let me tell you, in terms of the proof, you mentioned the proof. Now, it's important to know who Seymour Hersh is. Seymour Hersh is the gold standard in investigative journalism. I have studied his works for many years now. I can't tell you whether he is personally a liberal or a conservative. He doesn't have an axe to grind, but he loves good journalism, and he has some very strict policies. And one of them is that he will not report on something unless he personally conducts a face-to-face interview and takes the information from the top governmental officials that provide it to him. He's got an incredible knack for linking up with people in the White House, in the Pentagon, State Department, all sorts of organizations, domestic and overseas. He does not speculate. Now, whenever the governments are trying to smear him, they always say, well, he's a conspiracy theorist. he doesn't theorize anything. He reports, and he reports with exquisite accuracy what top government inside officials tell him and what he can confirm from talking to others, because not everyone is going to have a completely accurate story. But you talk to 3, you talk to 4 or 5 people, and where their information intersects, you know, okay, that's a data point that's absolutely certain. And if you read, as Tucker Carlson did, Tucker Carlson gave quite a good discussion of this. And as he said, if you look and you see the incredible detail and the insight into every conversation and every particular of the entire conspiracy, the plot to carry out the greatest terrorist act since 9/11, then Tucker Carlson, who never says this, he said, you cannot read this report without knowing that it's true. And I agree with that. I've read many of his reports, and it's not unusual that he would have to, he usually doesn't come up with the conclusions, but he will lay out the information and you arrive at conclusions. But in this case, there really is nothing, no room for supposition. It's all laid out in great detail.
And of course, Colonel, the repeated statements by Victoria Nuland and by Joe Biden themselves, long before the explosion, that the pipeline would not be permitted to go on to be operated. So what we have is a grave international crime, a crime of international terrorism. The world's greatest living journalist has compiled the case, and yet we still have officials of your government in the CIA and in the White House press room denying it, though they have ceased to imply or even explicitly state that it was someone else that did it, that it was Russia that did it. They show no interest in finding out who actually did it, but they deny that they did it. And yet, right at the beginning of this interview, you said, and many people's hearts will have sunk, that there will be no consequences. What that means then is that the rule of law that they're always talking about, the rules-based order that they're always talking about, simply no longer exist.
Well, I think to a great degree that is true. We're talking about power politics. The whole war in Ukraine has nothing to do with right or wrong. It has to do with geopolitical advantage. And the State Department and Pentagon, the White House, have made a decision. They've basically adopted the decision of President Barack Obama when he was in power, that we needed to damage Russia, perhaps to take it over, perhaps to dismantle it. But in any event, we needed to make things sufficiently impossible for Russia that we compelled them to join the very major war that was already underway. Now, just to recap a little, the United States in 2014 coupled up with the United Kingdom, and we conducted a coup to overthrow the government of Kiev, the duly elected, popularly elected government of Yushchenko. I can't pronounce his name, but anyway, the president at the time, he was overthrown. He fled in a very violent coup, that murdered a great number of people, some of them police officers, some of them just people who opposed the overthrow of the government. And the CIA was involved in it. Victoria Nuland, who was with the U.S. State Department at a high level, she was on the ground. She was conducting discussions about who should be the ministers of the new government, and she was doing this even before the outgoing president had been thrown out of office. And so we put in place a revolutionary junta. The revolutionary junta promptly amended the Russian or the Ukrainian constitution. That constitution had previously had that Ukrainian was the first language of the country, Russian was the second language. The reason for that is that a huge portion of Ukraine's citizens are Russians. They follow the history, the culture, all of these things of Russia, and they speak Russian. And so when this happened, you can imagine if somebody told all of your English listeners, okay, next week, if you want to transact business, if you want to get a driver's license, if you want to teach school, you have to begin speaking German. And otherwise, we're not going to help you, and we're going to fire your teachers. And so, well, people would rebel in a minute. And this is what happened. The people in the Donbass and in Crimea, they almost all spoke Russian as their native language. Many of them didn't speak Ukrainian at all. And so they said, okay, we're going to declare independence. They did. And immediately the United States was flooding in deadly weapons with which to build up a huge Ukrainian army so that they could launch war against these Russian areas of Ukraine. And they did so, and that war raged. This was not a real small war. There were 14,000 people killed, most of them civilians, because there weren't a lot of military targets in the Donbass. 14,000 people were killed over a 7-year period. And Russia had avoided being drawn into the war. They didn't want a war. Their army was a home guard. Now they had very advanced nuclear weapons, and they had some very good weapon systems. But the army was not an expeditionary force like that of the UK or of the United States. Our forces go off all over the place and they make wars in all different countries. Russia didn't do that. Russia wasn't going out attacking other countries. So it went for 7 years standing on the sidelines before it finally was clear that Ukraine was about to launch a massive attack on the Russian citizens, or not citizens, they were citizens of Ukraine, but they were Russian people right on the border of Russia, and they were about to be attacked by the Ukrainians. And that's the point at which President Putin ordered his outnumbered, unprepared forces to cross the border and basically to draw the Ukrainian army to the north, where they would have to defend the capital, so that he managed to rescue the people of the Donbass from an imminent attack. And of course, we portrayed it. We said, "Look at this! Russia has crossed a sovereign national border, as though they were the first country in all human history to ever do this." Meanwhile, we're ignoring the fact that hey, can you think of a few places we did it? How about Iraq? How about Syria? How How about Serbia? How
Colonel,
about Libya? It
Colonel,
goes on.
Colonel,
Yes.
Colonel, there's only 40 countries in the entire world that Great Britain has not invaded. And I'm including yours in that tabulation. It's, as always, a real lesson in geopolitics and law to hear you speak. Thank you for joining us on the Mother of All Talk Shows. Colonel Senator Richard Black.